The Buffalo Bills are getting a new stadium, the offensive line is solidified, and several outstanding herd mentality questions are all coming up today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Tuesday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, or if you're joining us on YouTube, your first watch every day. We got quite a bit of stuff to get to here today on a Tuesday. First of all, the stadium agreement has been finalized. We got to talk about that. The Bills brought back Boettger and Ryan Bates to the offensive line and really stabilized things up front, in my mind, at least offensively. And then so many great herd mentality questions were submitted, and I want to get to several of them here to close things out today. Some really good talking points coming up later on in today's podcast. Let's start with the big news, the stadium. It was announced that a $1.4 billion stadium is going to be built for the Buffalo Bills. It's a 30-year agreement, and according to Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, she described it as an ironclad agreement where if the team ever moves, they would have to pay back the entire cost of the stadium. This is a big deal for the long-term viability of the Buffalo Bills in Western New York. And regardless if you like where the stadium's going, the cost of the stadium, open air, grass versus artificial surface, all the details that come with this, I think we can all let out a collective sigh of relief knowing that the Buffalo Bills aren't going anywhere, at least for the next 30 years. And I feel like ever since Terry Pegula bought the team, that has been a fear that has subsided for probably most of us. But until this stadium deal came together, there was always a little bit of doubt, at least in my mind. But they pulled it off. The Buffalo Bills, 30-year agreement, $1.4 billion stadium. It's going to be built in Orchard Park. As far as the funding goes, $850 million is coming from the public, with $600 million from New York State and $250 million from Erie County. $200 million is coming from the NFL, and that's kind of like a loan that the NFL has, a program set up to help teams build new stadiums, and the Pegulas will have to pay back $50 million of that $200 million. And then the Pegulas are paying $350 million plus any overages. And there will be overages. If anyone's ever worked on a construction project, you know that there are contingencies, things come up, there are change orders, and any of that goes right back to the Pegulas to pay. So it's an Orchard Park. That's where it's going to be. It's an open-air stadium with a grass surface. I'm very happy about the grass surface. It is much better for injury prevention. And so that's great news. You guys know, if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, the open air conversation versus a dome has come up a lot. I'm team open air. I think you embrace the elements of your region and build a football team that can compete in them and use it to your advantage. I think that's a big deal. And I like that the Buffalo Bills, who have played outdoor football games ever since their existence in Western New York, that's not changing. I think that's a unique competitive advantage that should be used to your advantage. And so I'm happy that it's an open-air stadium. Now, selfishly, I'd love to just go sit in a dome and watch football games. I love going to Atlanta. I love, being inside. It's great. But from a competitive standpoint, open air is better for Buffalo. It's going to be 60 to 62,000 seats, plus another 5,000 more, I guess not more seats, but capacity can hold 5,000 more people on a standing room only party deck. You'll catch me in the seats. 80% of the seats in the stadium will be covered by a partial roof or overhang. And the stadium will be 1.5 million square feet, which is up from the 900,000 square foot stadium that currently exists. And that will accommodate larger seats and larger concourses. So those are the nuts and bolts of this new deal. And I think just kind of coming over the top here, the overarching thought that I have about all of this is that the Buffalo Bills aren't going anywhere. And I'm excited for a new stadium. 2026 is when it's expected to be operational. So after we got that news on Monday morning, later in the day, the Bills' offensive line stabilized. And I was very happy to learn that they're bringing back Ike Boettger on a 1-year deal and Ryan Bates on a 4-year deal. And after the Ike Boettger announcement was made, I was thinking to myself, well, there goes Bates. He's going to Chicago. And then what? Like an hour later, you find out that the Bills are matching the offer sheet from the Chicago Bears, and he's back in Buffalo. Brandon Beane, he announced it in a press conference that he was having at the owners' meetings. So there you go. So let's talk about Ike Boettger first, a 1-year deal. He's 27 years old. He turns 28 in October. He started 17 games over the last 2 seasons for the Bills. He's been with the team for 4 seasons. A guy that's been around. They love the Iowa background. Good culture guy. They developed him. He's turned into a meaningful spot starter. He has versatility to play both guard and center, which matters a lot. And he's, of course, coming off of that Achilles injury from back in December. And so that's normally a 9-month recovery time for an Achilles. And so I think you can expect him to be ready to go around the very beginning of the season, around September. So he's probably a candidate to start the season on the PUP list. And so what I really like here is obviously an established player within the organization, a player that started some meaningful football games for the Bills over the last couple of years. I think he's an average player. I don't think he should be a preferred starter, and he won't be. You know, the Bills have Ryan Bates back on a 4-year deal. They've got Roger Saffold. This is your guard center backup to go with Greg Manns. And so now between Morse, Boettger, Manns, and Bates, you've got 4 guys that have game experience in the NFL playing center. They can snap, and that's good. That's a very good thing. So I think this is a great addition to solidify the depth, and obviously they have a front row seat to the injury and the recovery and where Boettger is, and so they obviously feel good about that. Now the big news, and I am thrilled about this, Ryan Bates is back. He was a restricted free agent. The Chicago Bears signed him to an offer sheet. The Bills had until tomorrow to match it, or he walks and goes to Chicago. Not so fast. Brandon Beane brings him back on a 4-year deal. According to Brad Biggs, the 4-year contract for Ryan Bates, the offer sheet that he signed with the Chicago Bears was for $17 million. So 4-year, $17 million deal. And the first 2 years were fully guaranteed at $8.8 million. That, again, courtesy of Brad Biggs. So this is definitely the type of contract that you recognize as one that the Bills are paying Ryan Bates to be a starter. I'm excited about that. We saw what he meant to this offensive line at the end of last season, and that's really his first opportunity to play. And I thought he elevated that entire offensive line, playing next to Mitch Morse. We saw Deion Dawkins play the best football of his career with Ryan Bates next to him. And then you have another guy here in Bates to go with Morse who see the game like a center and are familiar with the protection calls. And those guys played so well off of each other. So I'm happy that he's back. The big question now is left or right guard. He's come out and said that he feels most comfortable on the left side. Well, that's also where Roger Saffold's been playing for like the last 5 years of his career. He's got experience at right guard, though. And so that's what Aaron Kromer's got to sort out. Who's your right guard versus who is your left guard? And I think when you consider Spencer Brown being right tackle, you may want to have your more experienced guy there on the right side, but it comes down to who can play the position the best. So maybe it's Saffold going to right guard, and you think about him as kind of a one-year thing anyways, where if Ryan Bates is going to be your fixture for the next 3-4 seasons, 2 at least, maybe that's the guy that you say, let's keep him at left guard because that's the more long-term thing. Roger Saffold, we trust to play right guard, and he would be a benefit to Spencer Brown. But this is what you trust Aaron Cromer to sort out. So I like the makeup of this offensive line room. Your starters, Dawkins and Brown at tackle, Saffold and Bates at guard, Mitch Morse your center, and your key backups are Tommy Doyle, Cody Ford, Greg Manns, and Ike Boettger. I like that a lot. After months of playing, college basketball has determined the top teams for the Final Four and will determine this year's national champion this coming week. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your sports betting needs and info from all the latest odds, contests, and player props. You name it, they got it. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action, because BetOnline, it's where the game starts. All right, let's dig into some herd mentality questions. Great stuff to get into this week. Let's dive right in. First one comes from Chris, who says, longtime listener, first-time questioner for Locked On Bills. Well, thank you, Chris. Welcome. Wanted to get your thoughts on the Bills' kick and punt return situation going into this next season. Last year didn't go ideally in terms of the Bills' return game, but I was wondering, do we give McKenzie and Stevenson another crack at winning the job? Unsure on McKenzie returning balls, but Stevenson is still young, fast, and hopefully can improve. Looking elsewhere on the Bills roster, I know that we have had Hyde return, but it seems unlikely we would have an aging vet who is essentially our defensive scheme lining up over the deep over the course of a full season. Crowder has some return experience, but as someone who has had an injury history, that seems too much like a gamble. With all of that, I don't see an heir apparent for the role next year. Do you see one of the 4 players I mentioned winning the punt and or kick return job? Is there anyone else on the roster with return experience that the Bills should also be considering? So, yeah, I think you've got a couple guys here on Isaiah McKenzie and Marquez Stevenson that I think are in the mix. And obviously, Sean McDermott lost confidence in both of those players this past year. It's tough. You've got Jamison Crowder, who does have some punt return experience. He was really good at that in college and did so early in his career, but really hasn't over the last several seasons. You've got Duke Johnson. He did both back in 2016 for the Cleveland Browns. But at the end of the day, this is unsettled. And perhaps the Bills can draft a player with some experience in the return game to help answer this question, whether that's a corner, a running back, or a wide receiver. But this definitely remains a concern in my view. Daniel says, one thing I was hoping you could discuss for the folks who our team draft a running back in the first round is the economics of it. I find myself explaining this quite a bit to my friends, but obviously can't do as good of a job as you. When you talk about finding quality running back production in later rounds, you can also find cheap running back production in free agency. Drafting a running back in the first round instantly puts the running back amongst the higher paid running backs in the league as a rookie, especially in the top 10. It would be incredibly difficult for that player to ever live up to that contract. I love Saquon Barkley as a player, but even his rookie contract, in my opinion, wasn't a value. Contrast that with premium or higher paid positions like edge, wide receiver, or corner, where second contracts are quite large. The value of that rookie deal or cheap labor is massive. To summarize, the economics of the rookie contract make it way more attractive to draft premium positions over running backs, regardless of the perceived production a first-round running back may have. Well, first of all, Daniel, be nice to my friend Daniel, because you did a really good job of explaining that in this message that you sent to me. So first of all, there's that. Now let's build off of that and give some really practical examples, because I'm with you. Not only is it easy to find running back production in the NFL, you also don't really have to pay for it. But if you pick one in the first round, you're paying for it with the premium, resource allocation, and money. So the 25th pick in this year's draft is going to sign A 4-year, $14.3 million deal. That's an average annual value of $3.6 million. An average annual value of $3.6 million would slot that running back pretty high in terms of pay in the NFL. That would make them the 20th highest paid running back in the NFL. You pick a running back at 25, they immediately become the 20th highest paid running back in the NFL. The $14.3 million in total contract value would be the 14th highest paid running back in the NFL. So whether you want to go average annual value, you want to go total value of the contract, you're paying a running back pretty significantly in the landscape of paying running backs in the NFL. Now let's apply that same thing to a cornerback, where it's the same deal, 4 years, $14.3 million, $3.6 million average annual value. That cornerback is coming in as the 48th highest paid corner in the NFL. At wide receiver, again, the same place, 48th highest paid wide receiver. Now let's do a even more practical application. The Bills drafted Greg Rousseau, a defensive end, last year with pick 30. Greg Rousseau right now, who is a starter for the Bills and will be probably at least for the next 3 or 4 seasons, is the 90th highest paid edge player in the NFL. 90th. Contract value always skews heavily towards premium positions. And that's why not only is it good to pick premium positions in the first round, because they are premium positions and they matter the most, but you're also getting a economic player on a value deal at a premium position, as opposed to picking a non-premium position and that player suddenly becoming one of the highest paid players in the league at their position. So Daniel, love this question. Absolutely love it. And hopefully between the way you asked it and the information that I gave, people can gain some really good insight here on the economic factors of drafting a running back in the first round. NorCal Bills fan says, I know you've touched on it before, but could you give us a rundown on a couple of things here? And so he asked 3 questions here. I want to answer them as they're asked. He says, what the too high safety defense is and why it is so popular and successful. So too high safety defense was something that happened all the time back in the early 2000s, late 90s, stuff like that. It was a big trend, and then it kind of went away, and now it's back. So what is it? It is 2 deep aligned safeties, 2 safeties that are 15, 20 yards off the ball. It helps with coverage spacing because you're not having a 1 high safety. You have 2, right? They're responsible for half the field each, as opposed to 1 safety responsible for the whole width of the field in terms of being deeper than the deepest guy. So it helps with coverage spacing, helps over the top to take away throws down the field, and it's designed to force offenses to be patient with all of the defenders maintaining vertical leverage. So if you want to be a gunslinger and be aggressive against too high, it's going to be tough because you have that much leverage vertically from the defensive side of things. So it tests your ability to be patient, not only with the throws that you're willing to make, but being willing to run the football. So as you've seen this happen more and more in the NFL against the good quarterbacks like Pat Mahomes, like Josh Allen, this is kind of the trend. So the next question is, do you think it will grow in popularity this coming season? And Josh will see it a lot. Yes, absolutely. Spread passing attacks invite this type of coverage. Josh is going to see it a ton. I think that's why the Bills have, at least through the moves that they made this offseason, suggested to us that they're caring more about 12 personnel, which means getting some, bigger bodies on the field with O.J. Howard and Dawson Knox. Moving on from Cole Beasley, bringing in Jamison Crowder, that's an indication to me that they care more about yards after catch. Trying to sign J.D. McKissick and ultimately landing Duke Johnson. Good check down options that can create after the catch. Allows you to stay patient. Go back to the Saints game last year on Thanksgiving. Go back to the second Patriots game. Go back to the playoff game against the Patriots. Part of what made Josh Allen so good in those games was his willingness to just get the ball out of his hands. Take a profit, and it set up those throws down the field. And having better underneath options allows you to do that. And I think that's been an effort the Bills have made with the design of their roster so far this offseason. And the last question is part of this sequence, which is really good stuff here. He said, if so, and you were Ken Dorsey, how would you attack it with the weapons the Bills have now? And what type of weapons would you go after to improve the Bills' ability to attack that type of defense? So first of all, arm talent and mobility like Josh Allen is huge. Josh Allen's arm talent allows him to fit the football into tight windows that other quarterbacks can't challenge. He can really, if you want to flood coverage lanes, that's great, but Josh Allen can put a lot of stress on you because of his arm talent and his ability to move. He can move and take defenders out of zones and create space, and then he's got that big arm to throw the football. So Josh Allen is a weapon against cover two. But it also comes back to running the football well. If they have two high safeties, that means that they're not +1 in the box. We talk about this all the time. Running the football is often a math question, right? What's the box count, and is it favorable for you to run the football? Well, when they're putting two safeties back, they're probably not going to be +1 in the box. So you're getting good box counts to run the football. You got to be able to do it. So that's big. And then taking profits and being patient. Yards after catch, what we talked about when I was referencing that Saints game and that second Patriots game and the third Patriots game. Being patient, picking your spots, don't chase big plays. Just get the ball out, get the ball out, get the ball out. They're eventually going to start kind of triggering, coming downhill, tackling, and then you set up the double moves. You set up the route combinations to get guys free down the field. But it starts from running the football and being able to get the quick passing game going, get the ball out of Josh's hands, and create opportunities for these guys to produce after the catch. Great question there. Next one comes from Underboss, who says, I've listened to the Locked On pod since you started and really enjoy your knowledge on our favorite team as well as the draft. With that said, do you think Daxton Hill could play and thrive at boundary cornerback in our system? My opinion, he would be a great pick if the top 4 cornerbacks are off the board, and Hill is so athletic and underrated. I don't hear him being mentioned in the top 15 like he should, and you being a draft guru, I wanted to see what you think. Well, first of all, I love Daxton Hill. He's a safety out of Michigan, and I think he's number 13 or 12 on my board. I love him, right? He's a top half of the first round player in terms of the way I value his skill set. I think he's a stud. And he played safety for Michigan, but he played a ton of man coverage in the slot. A ton. So he played deep zones and man coverage. I think he's a very clean projection to cornerback. This dude is athletic. He's got good size. Super physical. This guy's ability to trigger and click and close and fire downhill and tackle. Love it, man. He's a heat-seeking missile. A lot like Boettger in that regard. He's a lot like Darnell Savage as well from the Green Bay Packers in terms of that downhill trigger, that tackling, that physicality. He's got athleticism and ball skills too. Maybe not elite level ball skills, but good enough ball skills. So I think this is absolutely a great idea. If you can't get one of those top 4 corners and you want to go with a corner, I wouldn't hesitate on this. Daxton Hill is 6 foot 191, 32 and a quarter inch arms. That's good length. We talked about that last week. He's got the arm length you're looking for. Ran a 4.38 40-yard dash, a 6.57 3-cone, which is an elite time. It's one of the best times you'll ever see. And he also had a 4.06 short shuttle, which is outstanding. That's a 76th percentile test for a corner. Sign me up. Sign me up for Daxton Hill at 25. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Wind often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions like, is your Odyssey an LX or an EX? And wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and save money when using Rock Auto. Why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? They have everything you can need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Make sure you write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. They have amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need over at rockauto.com. All right, we got a few more good ones to get to. I really like this next one. Comes from Zach. Zach says, I haven't seen any news about John Brown signing in free agency. Would you be interested in bringing him back on a cheap deal as a fast receiver who knows the offensive terminology and could be used as a placeholder for a guy like Jameson Williams if they draft him and have to wait a few weeks for him to be available? So I think about this a lot. And I was an advocate for the Bills not releasing John Brown last year. But it's hard to argue with the decision based on the results. This guy didn't do anything last year. He was released by the Bills in March 2021. He was signed by the Raiders shortly thereafter. He was cut before the season. He didn't make the Raiders team. He was unsigned from August 31st until October 26th, like 2 months. The Broncos then signed him to their practice squad. He was on the Broncos practice squad for 34 days and was cut. The following week, he was signed to the Jaguars practice squad. He was on the Jaguars practice squad for 21 days and then was cut. He was unsigned for 6 weeks, and then the Bucs signed him to their practice squad. Pretty concerning year, and we're talking about teams that needed wide receiver help last year. The Raiders, the Broncos, Tampa with all their injuries, the Jaguars definitely needed wide receiver help, and this guy couldn't stick anywhere. So that's very concerning to me. I think he could still play. I know that his last year in Buffalo didn't have a ton of production, but I mean, he had that ankle injury. He just wasn't right. But it's something I'd think about. My concern is, has the ship sailed in Buffalo to the point where it's just not helpful to bring him back, given a major shift in his role? You know, you want to get more out of Gabe Davis. You got Jamison Crowder. You have McKenzie, who you want to kind of give more to. Do you sign this guy as your, what would be your fourth receiver, fifth receiver? He doesn't really play special teams. I think you're asking yourself, would you rather have John Brown or Marquez Stevenson? And Stevenson at least has some return upside. It's challenging. I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have. But it's hard for me to reconcile the last year of John Brown's career, where he had tons of great landing spots to contribute, and he just didn't. So maybe he needs to come back to Buffalo and be the best version of himself, but I have some doubts about that actually materializing. Worthwhile conversation. Good question. Next one comes from Brian. He said the guys on the PFF NFL podcast did a live mock draft, and they ended up drafting Tyler Linderbaum to the Bills. They said he was too good of a prospect to pass up at 25, and he could be a starter for 10-plus years. And even though the Bills just signed Morse to an extension, they said Buffalo could move him inside to guard or just trade him. Is this a crazy idea, or does it have some legitimacy? Tyler Linderbaum's one of the most tricky evaluations in this year's draft class for me. He's an awesome football player. Watch him at Iowa. This guy is rock solid. Good technique. He's powerful. He's athletic. Nobody gets by him in pass protection. He is terrific. He has the Iowa background. He has a wrestling background. A lot of things that not only the Bills love in offensive linemen, but the NFL loves in offensive linemen. Here's the problem. He's 6'2", 296 pounds with 31 and an eighth inch arms. He just doesn't come close in terms of measurables and what you're looking for. His height is in the 6th percentile. His weight is in the 5th percentile. He's in the 1st percentile for wingspan at 75 3/8, and the 1st percentile for arm length. I mean, for as good as he was at Iowa, and I think he can be a great player in the NFL, I just think you have to be really mindful of those measurables. And because of those measurables, I personally have a hard time slotting this guy to a guard position. So ideally, he'd be a center for you. And the Bills are committed to Mitch Morse. challenging for sure. I'd let some other team pull the trigger on Tyler Linderbaum, but he's a really good football player. Last one today comes from Anthony. Anthony says, how badly does the David Ojabo injury hurt his stock? And do you think he's worth a flyer at 25 if there? So David Ojabo, a edge rusher from Michigan, and he had a really good season this past year. Loved his tape. Really high-level flashes of rush combinations. He's got good first step, good length, good pass rush acumen for a guy that's only been playing football for like 5 years. Really high upside player. He had an Achilles injury recently, probably missed his rookie season. Is he worth it at 25? I struggle with that, mostly because he's a raw football player that is not going to help you this year. And if I'm the Bills, I'm thinking about this year's team and using that resource at 25 to do something meaningful to help me this year. And I don't think David Ojabo is going to help you this year. Now, could he be worth the wait? Yes. But I just let some other team do that. It's a worthwhile consideration. If he's healthy, he's absolutely worth 25. But given the Bills' needs and just using that resource to maximize your ability to field the best possible team this year, I kind of struggle with David Ojabo as a realistic Bills option. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I'm thinking tomorrow we're going to talk some running backs. I want to tell you about my running back rankings and really do a primer on that position group for the Buffalo Bills. Unless some crazy breaking news happens, that's the plan for tomorrow. But regardless, we're talking Buffalo Bills football here for you on your podcast feeds or on YouTube. So don't miss it. Make sure you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.